Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, Jeff, we have war, more war, and continual war in the news for today's broadcast. But to start us off, comedian and actor Carey is one of few who realizes the origin of holidays that most of the world celebrates today. At a White House Correspondents' Dinner in May of 2002, he jokingly spoke about how many of the holidays practiced today are not of biblical origin.
At that dinner, Carey spoke about 3 holidays that have nothing to do with the Bible: Christmas, Easter, and Halloween. He mentioned how there's nothing in the scriptures that tells readers to give gifts or celebrate the birth of the Savior. Neither is there any mention of Santa Claus. Now, concerning Easter, Carey spoke about the promotion of the Easter Bunny and asked, why is the Christian religion the only religion that needs a mascot to sell their stuff?
Great question. And lastly, Halloween, he said, we're always being told Satan is evil and we need to avoid the devil. And once a year, everyone says, let's party with this guy. He said, it's ridiculous.
Well, the CEO of the newly acquired drug company is being criticized from raising the price of a drug used by AIDS and cancer patients from, get this, Catan, $13.50 a pill to $750 per pill. And many, as you can imagine, are outraged. Now, Martin Skhreli was even called a disgusting specimen of humanity after he announced a 5,000 increase in the price of Darafrin. The 32-year-old has a bachelor's in business administration from Baruch College, and he learned the ins and outs of healthcare as a hedge fund manager who often clashed with drug companies.
Well, coming from a world of hedge funds into pharmaceuticals, one would wonder if he didn't do it to make lots of money. Well, Shkreli said, I think it'll be a win-win for everyone. Our company is going to profit and will develop new drugs for diseases that no one's touched.
The board of directors from Retrofin, the first drug company he founded in 2002, kicked him out of the company and filed suit against him for $65 million, saying he used his control over Retrofin to enrich himself and to pay back investors in a hedge fund who lost millions in a bad investment. Now, another lawsuit brought by a former employee of Retrofin accused Skhreli of harassing the employee's family.
A court document provided states in the letter to Pierretti, who was the victim, his last name, his wife, I hope to see you and your children homeless and will do whatever I can to assure this, as well as a Facebook post to that same man's son, which said, I want you to know about your dad. He betrayed me. He stole $3 million from me. And of course, that lawsuit with that former employee and him, it was settled out of court.
Well, the $65 million lawsuit states that he spent more time moving large sums of money between the company and his former investors than he did in actually developing effective medications.
Well, Russian lawmakers have given the go-ahead for the Russian military to carry out airstrikes in Syria. President Putin said in an address, the only way to combat terrorists in Syria and in neighboring countries is to act preventatively, to destroy the terrorists in the territories that they already have captured.
He continued, Russia has always supported and still supports the fight against terrorism, but we are sure that this fight should be conducted according to international law. From the U.S., the Pentagon has confirmed that the Russian military has notified the U.S. that it was starting its air operation.
The Russians wasted no time beginning their airstrikes against ISIL, targeting a communications center, oil and arms depots. This comes as a request from Damascus that has been engaged in this fighting for almost 5 years against those militants in ISIL. And the Russian Defense Ministry has stated that there will be no ground troops involved in this operation, and it is limited merely to airstrikes.
Sergey Ivanov said the use of the Russian military on the ground is out of the question, according to the president.
Well, as we continue our ongoing coverage in Syria and Russia's involvement in that, Larry has our latest update on how big this campaign is. Larry, just how expansive is the bombing campaign with Russia airstrikes in the area of Syria?
At this point, Russia's Ministry of Defense has publicly confirmed that they, in conjunction with the Syrian army, have carried out several strikes against ISIS insurgents, spanning 3 provinces, including Homs, Hama, and Latakia. The strikes are reported to have been aimed at military equipment, communication facilities, and weapons storages. Though Russian involvement has provoked controversy in some circles, President al-Assad has welcomed Moscow's aid, and it was in fact Damascus which requested Russian assistance. Analysts are now labeling the sedition in Syria the worst war in the world, as fear continues to mount due to American and Russian fighters both being in Syria but on opposite sides of the conflict. The uproar in Syria started 4 years ago when insurgents instigated a coup to overthrow Syria's democratically elected president Bashar al-Assad. 250,000 people have since died and 12 million have fled the ancient nation, creating a refugee crisis in Europe and parts of the territories being held by ISIS. Russian efforts have reportedly been focused on groups other than ISIS that have been striving to overthrow the Syrian government. This is being seen as an attempt to strengthen the position of al-Assad, a move which Secretary of Defense Carter said is tantamount to throwing gas on the fire. The U.S. is also said to be offended by the way the Russian military chose to make it aware of its intentions to strike. An hour before its strike, it walked into the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, announced that Russian aircraft were about to begin flying over Syria, and that American airplanes should stay away. This, the Secretary of Defense said, was unprofessional. The two nations have now reportedly scheduled a video conference, however, to try and establish procedures which will work to ensure that their planes don't run into each other, particularly if Russian aircraft were to strike groups supported by the U.S. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan, Jeff, back to you.
Katan, it sure seems that Russia is not holding back when it comes to these airstrikes. Well, the Pentagon's position on the Russian airstrikes against ISIL is that they are not hitting their intended targets. Now, Moscow denies these allegations. And as a rebuttal to U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter's remarks, Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov stressed the great length that their Air Force was taking when he said, "Our American partners have concerns for the fact that our airstrikes may hit the wrong targets. We are very closely watching our strikes, that they are carefully conducted. Our targets are solely the position of objects and equipment belonging to the armed terrorist group ISIL."
Mr. Lavrov also said Moscow has no knowledge of any civilian casualties, and Russian military advisors could back that up to anyone who wanted proof, due to the fact that the U.S.-led coalition and Russia are now both taking military action in Syria. The Russian foreign minister and his United States counterpart, Secretary of State John Kerry, have agreed to hold negotiations and consultations to de-escalate conflicts between the two nations and help prevent possible misunderstandings from taking place in the region.
While America did seem to be launching accusations at Russia for the new turn of events, the Russian diplomat is not alluding to an uncooperative situation. Instead, Mr. Lavrov and Mr. Carey have both said they agreed on certain steps to provide and create conditions for further political change in Syria. While no details were shared as of yet, Mr. Carey was, however, taking proposals back to Washington for further discussion.
Now, to further aid in the strained relations between the two countries, both officials, Lavrov and Carey, have vowed to be in constant contact on this matter and to monitor the situation to prevent any possible misunderstandings from taking place. And as you can imagine, Jeff, this is especially important when militaries of both countries are now involved and present there in Syria. You want to be very careful that no one's toes get stepped on in this turn of events.
Well, turning our attention now to the southern end of the Middle East, we find another airstrike on the country of Yemen has targeted this time a wedding celebration. The death toll in this incident, according to UN figures, is up to 131 people. It's the deadliest single Air Force attack in the country since the war broke out. Now, reports suggest that a man with connections to the Houthi rebel movement was celebrating his wedding when the bombing happened.
However, the Saudi-led coalition is denying any involvement with this assault, blaming local militia for the devastation. Saudi-led airstrikes have been common for months now. In an interview with RT, Yemen political analyst Hasham Al-Maisi had much to say to refute the Saudi claims that this was the work of local rebels.
He said multiple times they've hit residential areas. They hit homes, they hit weddings, speaking, of course, of the Saudi-led forces. He continued, unfortunately, because there is no outcry, they're not going to stop doing that. Houthis don't have fighter jets. Islamic forces don't have fighter jets. When they keep saying that it's somebody else, when the Saudis yesterday, for example, denied it was them, that it must have been that of the Houthis. For God's sake, he said, the Houthis do not have fighter jets. Nobody's conducting airstrikes but the Saudis, so it must have been them.
Interesting. Now, Mr. Al-Maisi called on the UN and the international community to directly condemn the Saudis for these attacks. He explained how he didn't think that they would, however, because they have a lot of business to do with Saudi Arabia and a lot to gain, including weapons contracts and other military contracts. So their interests are a little bit divided between the two.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, he also went on to further explain the Saudis control a lot of the media globally. Unfortunately, Yemen doesn't have a lot of friends abroad. They don't have a lot of friends with the international community. So while the Saudis continue to pound us, a lot of people are making a lot of money, a lot of business with the Saudis. So it's not exactly to the best of their interest to condemn the Saudis. They do not want to antagonize the Saudis. So as you mentioned, Katan, it's more about doing business than about doing what's right.
That goes back to that love of money. While human rights watchdogs have been long sounding the alarm over a humanitarian catastrophe taking place in Yemen, recently revealed figures show it is civilians who are bearing the brunt of the war. Since the war started in March 2015, more than 2,200 have been killed and over 4,700 people injured.
Well, lastly in the news today, a monument of the Ten Commandments that supporters said reflects a history of law now violates the Oklahoma State Constitution, according to the state Supreme Court. In a recent ruling, the Oklahoma Supreme Court said public property shall not be used to support any religion, and they ordered the monument to be removed from in front of the Oklahoma City Capitol building.
However, as you might imagine, some are upset with this ruling, and there are already plans to fight the High Court's decision. Some lawmakers, in fact, are calling for the impeachment of the Supreme Court justices who made the ruling. Now, while the Attorney General's office wants a rehearing of the case, they believe the monument should stay as a historical one, not a religious one.
Former state representative of District 91, Mike Reynolds, says the problem is the court today has ruled and they said, oh, well, it doesn't comply with the Oklahoma Constitution because it's a religious monument. No one's ever said it's a religious monument. Well, some people may have, but not the people that passed that bill.
Mr. Reynolds helped spearhead placement of the monument and says they will fight the decision. Mr. Reynolds continued to emphasize the roots of where our country came from, our state was founded on, and the things of that nature. We know the Ten Commandments represent the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the Oklahoma Supreme Court may have spoken, but for now it's doubtful the monument will be moved anytime soon.
Now, another representative called the ruling judicial bullying and says lawmakers could decide to change the state constitution to keep the monument in place. Now, Katan, just as a little bit of history, this isn't the first time that there's been problems with this monument. In October of 2014, a man crashed into it with his car, broke it into several pieces, claiming that Satan told him to do it.
Wow.
Well, want to know the cause of all the sickness, disease, famines, wars, Syrian crisis, bombings of weddings, and the list goes on and on? Well, the Oklahoma Supreme Court just showed you. Remove the 10 Commandments and remove the only light of righteousness, the guidelines given to mankind on how to avoid all of these curses. Israel Hawkins says, if you remove the laws of Yahweh, you will bring disunity and the curse of death. Well, don't let another day go by without contacting the House of Yahweh and requesting your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. And don't forget to check out the Yisrael Hawkins Says program by going to www.yisraelsays.com. The most informative Bible search software on the market today is now available absolutely free. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494 or visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also check out our new website at www.ypnnews.com. And to email the House of Yahweh, send your emails to info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another exciting and informative message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.